Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to a new episode of our Letter to Vox podcast. Today we are launching a deep dive into, well, a text that a lot of historians would point to as the moment, the very moment the intellectual world shifts from the medieval to the modern.
It's a huge claim, but it's hard to argue with.
We're talking about René Descartes' discourse on the method of rightly conducting the reason and seeking truth in the sciences.
Which is quite a mouthful of a title.
It is, but it tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah.
This isn't just a book. I mean, it's really a manifesto. It's a personal intellectual revolution.
That's the perfect word for it. Descartes basically looks at this entire mountain of existing knowledge, and he just declares, I doubt it all. I'm starting over from scratch.
The sheer nerve of that is just astounding.
And that audacious approach is precisely why this text is still so foundational. When René Descartes published this in 1637, he wasn't just, offering a new philosophy. He was offering a personal story, a roadmap, really, for how any individual could use a structured, rigorous method to get to absolute certainty.
Which was the ultimate prize.
The ultimate prize. And so our mission in this deep dive is to follow him on that journey right through all 6 parts of the discourse. We're going to go way beyond the famous phrase, the cogito.
I think, therefore I am.
Exactly. We want to really understand the intellectual crisis he was facing, the 4 incredibly powerful rules he came up with for reasoning.
And the moral code he had to build, the sort of temporary shelter for his mind.
The provisional moral safety net, just to survive while he was doubting everything. And then finally, how he uses that newfound certainty to rebuild the entire world, from the ground up, from physics to physiology.
So let's start with the man himself, the architect of this entire revolution, René Descartes.
Or to be precise, Assis Descartes.
Born March 31st, 1596, in La Haye-en-Touraine. And he came from a family of, minor nobility?
That's right. So this is a crucial point. This wasn't a man born into poverty or obscurity.
He had access to the best of the best.
The very best education the 17th century could offer. And that makes his later rejection of that education just so much more powerful.
It really does. Tell us a bit about his early life. It was stable, but also marked by some tragedy, right?
Yes. His mother died in May of 1597, just a little over a year after he was born. So he was raised mainly by his maternal grandmother and a nurse.
A nurse he apparently thought very highly of his whole life.
He did. Then, at the age of 8, he's enrolled in the Jesuit college Henri IV de la Flèche, a very esteemed school.
And he's there for a long time.
8 years. He gets this intensive classical training, but also mathematics, which becomes critical. And the Jesuits, they recognized his incredible intellect, but also his frail health.
Right.
So they gave him this unusual permission to stay in bed late into the morning, to study and reflect.
I just love that image. The father of modern rationalism is a guy who basically preferred to do his most profound thinking under the covers.
It's a wonderfully human detail, isn't it? And it points to his immediate intellectual habit. He prioritized this deep, solitary reflection over the rigid schedule of a classroom.
And it seems like even after 8 years at this top-tier school, he came away profoundly dissatisfied.
That's putting it mildly. He went on to study law at Poitiers, passed his legal exam in 1616, but he never practiced, not once.
Instead, he chose travel and military service, which seems like an odd choice given his intellectual side and, as you said, his physical frailty.
It does, but he was looking for something. He was looking for experience that the academic halls just couldn't give him.
The great book of the world, as he called it.
Exactly. And the real pivotal moment came when he was serving in Breda, in the Netherlands. There, he met a man named Isaac Beeckman.
Who was he?
Beeckman was a physician, a naturalist, and he became Descartes' first great scientific mentor. He got him excited about the practical applications of physics and math.
So this wasn't just abstract theory anymore.
No. Descartes even dedicated an early work, the Musicae Compendium, a treatise on music theory rooted in math. He dedicated it to Beeckman. That meaning really cemented his path toward a science that was grounded in certainty, not just tradition.
And that leads us to the big turning point, the vision of 1619. This sounds less like a decision and more like a revelation.
It's presented in the sources as nothing less than a spiritual and intellectual revelation. It's November 1619, he's serving under Maximilian of Bavaria, and he finds himself isolated during a cold winter in Germany.
In that famous stove-heated room.
That's the one. In that seclusion, he has this incredibly profound experience, a series of dreams or visions, and they culminate in this radical, all-encompassing idea of a universal method for the research of truth.
So he really believed he was, what, chosen, destined to find this.
That seems to be the case. He felt he was fulfilling a mandate, and this conviction led to an immediate, profound resolution. He would abandon the formal study of letters.
You mean like the entire library of accumulated human knowledge?
All of it. He would accept nothing as true unless he could personally verify it with his own flawless logic, or discover it through rigorous experience in...
The great book of the world.
Precisely.
So all those years of travel, they weren't aimless at all. They were a philosophical project, a very disciplined one.
Absolutely. He was actively replacing the passive consumption of ancient texts with critical, first-hand observation and reflection. This was the real genesis of his methodological work, a permanent shift toward total self-reliance in the search for truth.
Okay, so this brings us to part one of the discourse. This is his big declaration of independence from the academy. And he starts with what seems like a great compliment.
It does. It's almost disarming. He asserts that good sense, or reason, is equally distributed among all men.
We all have it. So if we all have reason, why do opinions differ so wildly? Why is everyone always arguing?
And that's his whole point. The difference, he says, lies in how we apply that reason, what paths we follow, what we pay attention to. The critique, though, is swift and sharp.
He doesn't hold back.
Not at all. He says, sure, we all have reason, but the greatest minds, the ones capable of the highest excellence, are also capable of the greatest aberrations, the biggest mistakes, if they apply their reason badly.
And he turns this critique on himself.
He does. He says that despite studying at one of Europe's most celebrated schools, he found himself involved in so many doubts and errors that the only certain thing he learned
Was how much he didn't know.
the profound extent of his own ignorance. That's his intellectual rock bottom. 8 years of elite schooling, and he feels he's come away with nothing certain at all.
So he starts to just dismantle the whole curriculum, piece by piece. What were his specific targets?
He starts with the humanities, languages, history, fables. He admits they're useful, sure, but he warns that spending too much time on them makes you a stranger to one's own country and time.
But his deeper worry was about distortion, right? Where they present reality.
Exactly. Fables, obviously, but even supposedly faithful histories. He felt they were guilty of presenting events not as they truly happened, but as they ought to have happened.
So to fit a moral lesson or some grand narrative.
Precisely. He complains that history often omits the meanest and least striking details, the messy, real stuff. And that leads readers into what he calls romantic extravagances. It gives you an unrealistic view of the world.
So he's worried that history is a bit too much like fiction. That's a pretty radical claim.
It is. Next up, he goes after rhetoric, eloquence, and poesy.
And his take is that these are just gifts of nature. You either have it or you don't.
Pretty much. He argues that true persuasive power comes from a clear mind that has arranged its thoughts skillfully. It doesn't come from following the rules of rhetoric. If your ideas are clear and true, you don't need artifice to express them.
Okay, so what about mathematics? This was the one subject he actually loved. The one thing that seemed to have that certainty he was craving.
And this is where his disappointment was, I think, most acute. He said he was especially delighted with mathematics because of the certitude and evidence of their reasonings. But he was just astonished that these foundations, so strong and solid, should have had no loftier superstructure reared on them.
Meaning their use was too limited.
Severely limited. It was almost exclusively restricted to the mechanical arts. For him, this was a tool capable of absolute proof, but it was being used for, trivial things. It was powerful but directionless, philosophically speaking.
And then he gets to the subjects that are supposed to guide your life. Morality and philosophy.
Oh, and he really lets them have it. The moralists, he said, were building magnificent palaces with no better foundation than sand and mud.
That's a strong image.
It is. They praise virtue, but they don't have a solid criterion for what virtue is, so they end up mistaking things like pride or apathy or even criminality for virtue itself.
And philosophy, the queen of the sciences.
For Descartes, this was the source of the whole infection. He says that after centuries of work by the most distinguished minds, not a single matter is not still in dispute.
If everything is still being argued about, then nothing is certain.
Exactly. If it's all still contested, then nearly everything is doubtful, or, at best, merely probable. And for Descartes, merely probable is the same as false. It's a ruthless standard.
And since all the other sciences, law, medicine, They all borrow their principles from philosophy.
They're all built on foundations that he deemed so infirm as to be completely useless in the search for truth.
So he makes this incredible decision. He abandons the library entirely. He's going to study the book of the world. Did he find his certainty there right away?
He found the exact opposite at first. He traveled for years, observing different customs, different people.
And what did he see?
Contradiction. He saw that people in other nations held beliefs that contradicted his own, and they held them just as fiercely as the philosophers contradicted each other. He realized the huge diversity of customs proved that most of our opinions are rooted far more in custom and example than any certain knowledge.
That must have been a crushing blow. First the schools fail him, now the world fails him.
It was, and it forced him back inward. He couldn't trust the schools, he couldn't trust the world's customs. The only tool left was his own individual reason.
And the method he was going to invent to guide it.
He resolved to make himself and his own mind the sole object of his study.
So this period of intense self-study culminates in that famous winter stay in Germany. He's alone, he's comfortable, and he's ready to rebuild his entire intellectual world. He starts with this brilliant analogy, doesn't he? Comparing knowledge to architecture.
The architectural analogy is absolutely key to understanding his whole approach, his desire for unification.
Right.
He says that works made of many parts by different hands like old cities with their winding, inefficient streets are inherently flawed. They lack the perfection of a system planned and executed by a single master.
Like a fortress designed by one engineer, or a geometrically planned town.
Exactly. Or, he says, the ordinances established by God or by a single great lawmaker like Lycurgus in Sparta. The point is about unity of design.
So the implication is that the sciences, which are just a jumble of different opinions from different people over centuries,
are inherently farther from the truth than the simple unified inferences drawn by a single focused mind using its own good sense.
and that leads him to this incredibly radical decision. He has to sweep away all of it, every single past opinion he's ever received.
This isn't just pruning the tree of knowledge, this is intellectual demolition. He compares it to a private individual who decides to pull down their own house to rebuild it on a more solid foundation.
But he's also very, very careful to issue a warning here, a kind of political disclaimer.
Oh, absolutely. He was keenly aware of the political instability of his time, the religious wars. He explicitly says that trying to reform a state is preposterous and disastrous.
So this radical doubt is for the individual mind only, not for society.
Strictly for the individual. He says custom often smooths over problems in a society that a philosopher could never foresee, and that big revolutionary changes usually just lead to chaos. His reform was confined to his own beliefs.
And he even warns that not everyone should try this.
No, he says this total stripping away of beliefs is only suitable for those who have enough patience requisite for orderly and circumspect thinking. You have to be sure you can actually rebuild after you demolish everything.
So before he gives us his new method, he first takes a look at the existing tools. Logic, mathematics. What did he find wrong with them?
He found traditional logic, the scholastic logic, to be useful mainly for communicating what you already know.
Not for discovering new things.
Right. Or worse, he said, for speaking without judgment of things of which we are ignorant. It was cluttered, mixing useful rules with what he called injurious or superfluous ones.
And what about math? Geometrical analysis and algebra.
They were better, but still flawed. He found analysis was too tied to physical figures, which fatigued the imagination, and algebra was just this obscure, confusing art with arbitrary rules that, he said, tend to embarrass instead of cultivating the mind.
So he wanted something that had the certainty of math, but was totally universal and simple.
That's it, exactly. A new method that combined the advantages of all three, logic, algebra, geometry, but with none of their defects. And this search is what led him to the 4 precepts, the famous rules of the Cartesian method.
Let's run through them, because they sound almost deceptively simple, but they became the engine of modern science.
They did. The very first rule is the rule of evidence, or you could call it skepsis. It commands us never to accept anything for true which I did not clearly know to be such.
That sounds like common sense, but it's more extreme than that.
It's extreme discipline. It means avoiding all precipitancy and prejudice. You can only admit ideas that are so clear and so distinct that there is no possible ground for doubt.
A sliver of doubt, and it's out. Okay, what's rule number 2?
That's the rule of analysis, or division. It demands that you take every difficulty you're examining and divide each into as many parts as possible.
Break it down.
Break it down into the smallest, most manageable components you can so you can solve each little piece adequately. It's like dismantling a complex machine to see how every single gear works.
So once it's all in pieces, the third rule is about putting it back together. The rule of construction, or order.
Correct. This rule dictates the path you have to take. You must conduct thoughts by commencing with objects the simplest and easiest to know, and ascending gradually to the knowledge of the more complex.
So you start with the easy stuff and build up, step by step.
And you have to establish a strict order. Even, he says, imposing an order on things that don't seem to have a natural one. If you know A leads to B and B leads to C, you have to prove A first. No skipping ahead.
And finally, the fourth rule. This is the quality control step, the rule of enumeration.
Or recursion, yes. This is where you make enumerations so complete and reviews so general that I might be assured that nothing was omitted. It's the rigorous double check.
You go back over your chain of reasoning and make sure there are no missing links.
Exactly. It's what provides that absolute, unshakable certitude that you find in an arithmetic proof. You know you haven't missed a single step.
And this confidence, this belief that he could structure all thought with the certainty of arithmetic, that's what led to his huge mathematical breakthrough, right? Fusing algebra and geometry.
That was the first major fruit of the method. By applying it to abstract proportions, viewing them as lines, expressing them with algebraic characters, he developed what we now call analytical geometry. It was revolutionary.
And he realized this method wasn't just for numbers or shapes.
He believed it could be applied to all things, to the knowledge of which man is competent. He truly thought nothing was so distant or so hidden that it couldn't be reached, as long as you followed this true order of reason.
So he was incredibly satisfied with these four rules. He felt he was ready to conquer all the other sciences.
He was. But he realized he had a problem. He needed a stable philosophical foundation first, and he'd just declared all existing philosophy to be infirm. He knew he was delaying the biggest task of all.
Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoy this podcast.
Okay, so we've established that Descartes has decided to tear down every single belief he holds, to rebuild his entire world of knowledge from scratch.
But that's not something you can do overnight, which creates this very practical, almost existential problem.
It does. How do you live? How do you make day-to-day decisions and be a good person while you're actively doubting the very nature of truth and falsehood?
It's a fantastic tension in the discourse. The intellectual radical needs this conservative ethical safety net.
He calls it his provisory code of morals. I love that phrase. It's a temporary lodging where he can live commodiously while the major rebuilding of his mind is underway.
He needs to avoid being irresolute in my actions, while his reason is basically in a state of suspended judgment.
Exactly. So he sets up 3 core maxims to guide his behavior. And the first one, as you hinted, sounds incredibly conservative for such a revolutionary thinker.
It really does. What is it?
The first maxim was pragmatic obedience. He resolved to obey the laws and customs of his country, adhering firmly to his faith, and to regulate his conduct based on the most moderate opinions held by the most judicious people around him.
So just fit in. Don't make waves.
Basically. He chose moderation because, as he put it, all excess is generally vicious. His thinking was that if he had to be wrong about something, choosing the middle path meant he was at less distance from the truth.
That's very practical. And he also had this interesting insight about what people say versus what they do.
Yes, he stressed that you should judge people by what they practiced rather than what they said. He was very aware of the corruption of our manners, as he called it. People's real beliefs are revealed in their actions.
And he made a crucial exception in this rule of obedience about making promises or vows.
A very important one. He classed as an extreme any promise that might abridge his future freedom to seek better judgments.
Why was that so vital to his moral code?
Because his entire life's project was based on the idea that tomorrow's reasoning might be better than today's. If he bound himself to an opinion or a course of action now, based on his current imperfect knowledge, he would be betraying the whole point.
He'd be shutting the door on future truth.
Precisely. Intellectual flexibility was paramount. Making a long-term ethical commitment based on what he currently believed would be an act of really intellectual self-sabotage.
That makes perfect sense. The method demands that you remain open.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what was the second rule for action?
The second was the rule of resolution in action. This one says that once you've adopted an opinion for the sake of action, even if you're not totally sure it's true, you have to stick to it as if it were absolutely certain.
So no second guessing once you've committed to a path.
None. This is pure practical necessity. He gives this powerful analogy of a traveler lost in a forest.
Right.
The traveler has to choose a direction, any direction, and then stick to it, walking in as straight a line as possible, even if they don't know if it's the right way out.
Because if you just wander around or keep changing your mind,
You're guaranteed to stay lost forever. This decisiveness, he noted, relieved him of all the repentings and pangs of remorse that paralyze people who are irresolute.
so internal debate can be endless, but external action needs to be firm. And the third maxim is a total shift. It's very stoic.
Very much so. Maxim 3 was to conquer self, not fortune. Or, as he put it, change my desires rather than the order of the world.
Acknowledge what you can and cannot control.
Exactly. He says that only our own thoughts are absolutely within our power. External things, wealth, honor, even health, are ultimately beyond our control. So desiring them too intensely is just a recipe for unhappiness.
And he argued that this perspective actually eliminates regret.
It does. If you truly understand the limits of your power, you stop desiring things you can't have. He asks, why should we regret not having the kingdoms of China or Mexico? They're impossible to get. It's the same principle. This stoic-like detachment was essential for him to achieve contentment while he was busy with his real work.
So after adopting this three-part code, he spent the next 9 years traveling, reflecting, and quietly pursuing his revolutionary design.
That's right. He described himself during this period as living like a spectator, just observing, rooting out errors in his own thinking, and reflecting on everything that could possibly be doubted.
But he's careful to distinguish himself from the skeptics.
Very careful.
Yeah.
He says he's not one of those who doubt only that they may doubt. His design was, in his words, singly to find ground of assurance. He was digging through the shifting sand to find the solid rock beneath.
And all those years of experience were the raw material he would use to test and establish his certain principles later on.
They were absolutely essential.
Okay, now we arrive at the true intellectual crucible, part 4. He's been living by his provisional moral code, he's gathered experience, and now he is ready to apply that first rule of his method, absolute rejection of doubt, to all of his most foundational beliefs.
This is the moment of hyperbolic doubt. He's pushing skepticism to its absolute logical limit. He resolves to reject as absolutely false anything that has even the slightest, the most minute ground for doubt.
And he just systematically demolishes all the traditional sources of knowledge. Let's walk through that process.
First, he rejects the senses. And his reason is simple. We know they sometimes deceive us. We've all seen optical illusions.
A stick in water looks bent.
Right. And if they deceive us even once, they cannot be fully trusted as a source of absolute truth. So out they go.
Okay, what's next?
Second, he rejects demonstrations and reasonings, even mathematical proofs. Because, he says, he knows that even men who are skilled in geometry can make mistakes, parallelisms, when they're working through simple proofs. If they can err, then reason itself isn't foolproof.
So the senses are out, reasoning is out. And then he brings out the big one. He rejects the distinction between waking life and dreams.
The dream argument. And this one is terrifying because it completely undermines the very reality we think we inhabit.
It really is.
His argument is that the very same thoughts, the same vivid perception he experiences while he's awake, he could also experience them while he's asleep. And in a dream, not one of them is true.
So he asks, what guarantee do I have that my current state, right now, no matter how real it feels, isn't just an incredibly convincing dream?
Exactly. He decides to suppose that everything his mind presents to him, his body, the world, all of external reality, is no more true than the illusions of his sleep.
So he is now standing at a complete void.
Yeah.
Everything he once believed is swept away or provisionally rejected as absolutely false. What is the one single thing that remains?
The act of thinking itself. As he pushed himself to this maximum limit of doubt, supposing that everything was false, he noticed an immediate and necessary fact.
Right.
And that fact was, it was absolutely necessary that I, who thus thought, should be somewhat.
And this insight is the famous cogito ergo sum.
I think, therefore I am.
Why is this the one unshakable certainty?
Because the very act of trying to doubt his own existence proves his existence. To doubt, you have to think. To think, you have to exist. Doubt is a form of thought. So to doubt that he exists, he must exist as a doubter.
You can't think yourself out of existence.
You can't. He said this principle was so certain and so evident that no ground of doubt, however extravagant, could be alleged by the skeptics capable of shaking it. This was it. This was the foundation for his entire philosophy.
So once he's established that I exist, he has to figure out the nature of this I. What is this thinking thing?
He concludes it is a res cogitans, a thinking substance. He realized he could pretend he had no body, that there was no world, no physical space at all, but he could not pretend that he was not thinking.
So his essence is thought.
His whole essence consists only in thinking, and it's completely independent of any material thing. This is a radical assertion. It establishes the mind, the I, as wholly distinct from the body, and crucially, more easily known than the latter.
That's a huge departure from previous philosophy, where the mind was often seen as intrinsically tied to the body. Descartes is saying you can know your mind exists, even if your body is a complete illusion.
That's the key revolution. And this specific certainty, seeing very clearly that in order to think it is necessary to exist, this leads him to his general rule for all truth.
Which is?
All the things which we very clearly and distinctly conceive are true. This is the famous criterion of Cartesian certitude. Clarity and distinctness become the official hallmarks of truth.
But there's a problem. This self, this I, though certain, is imperfect. It's imperfect because it doubts, and this imperfection is the logical bridge he uses to prove the existence of something perfect, God.
That's the move he makes. He observes that by doubting, he understands that he is not wholly perfect because knowing is clearly a greater perfection than doubting.
And yet he has an idea of a nature that is more perfect than himself.
He does. He possesses the idea of a being that is infinite, eternal, immutable, omniscient, all-powerful, the idea of God. And he asks, where did I get this idea?
He uses the principle of causality. The less perfect cannot be the cause of the more perfect.
Right. So the idea of this perfect being couldn't have been generated by his own imperfect, finite mind. And it couldn't have come from nothing. Therefore, the idea must have been placed in him by that truly perfect nature, by God.
And he doesn't stop there. He has a second proof, the ontological argument.
Yes, this one is based purely on the concept of God as a perfect being. He says when you examine the idea of a perfect being, you find that existence is intrinsically part of that idea.
Can you break that down?
His analogy is with a triangle. You cannot conceive of the idea of a triangle without also conceiving that its 3 angles equal 2 right angles. That's part of the definition. In the same way, he argues, you cannot conceive of a perfect being that lacks existence because existence is itself a perfection.
So, to be perfect, it must exist. God's existence is as certain as a geometric demonstration.
Logically, yes. It's entailed by the idea itself. And this final step closes the circle of his certainty. Because if God is a perfect and veracious being, he cannot be a deceiver.
And if God is not a deceiver,
then our general rule that our clear and distinct conceptions are true is guaranteed. It's underwritten by God. Falsity and error only creep in when our ideas are confused and obscure, which comes from our human imperfection, not from a trickster God.
And this knowledge of a good God also finally resolves the ultimate doubt, the dream argument.
Yes, because we now know that truth proceeds from a non-deceiving God, reason tells us we should only be persuaded by our clear and distinct reason, not by our imagination or our senses, which can deceive us. And as he notes, our reasonings are never so clear or so complete during sleep as when we are awake.
So the fear that we're perpetually dreaming is dispelled by the greater reliability and God-guaranteed certainty of our waking, disciplined thought.
Exactly. He has his foundation, the self, God, and the criterion of truth. Now he's ready to rebuild the world.
Right. Having established this metaphysical foundation, Descartes now feels he has the confidence to rebuild the entire physical world. And this is where he lets us in on the result of his unpublished treatise, The World.
A work he initially suppressed because he was afraid of the church's reaction, especially after what happened to Galileo.
So how does he present these radical new physics?
He uses a clever narrative device. He says, imagine a new world created in some imaginary space. All God needs to do is establish a few simple laws of nature and then lend his ordinary concurrence, just his continued act of preserving it, and everything else would unfold automatically, mechanically, from chaos.
So no need for constant divine intervention.
None at all. But this required a completely new definition of what matter fundamentally is.
What was it?
He reduced the essence of all matter to just one thing: spatial extension, pure length, breadth, and depth. Res extensa.
That's a huge shift. He's stripping away all the qualities that philosophers use to attribute to matter.
All of them. And if matter is just extension, that leads to 2 radical conclusions. First, there can be no such thing as a vacuum. Empty space is just unobserved, extended matter. And second, matter must be infinitely divisible, no atoms.
And this new definition of matter is the basis for his whole cosmology, the vortex theory.
The Whirlpool theory, yes. He explained the motion of the heavens and planets through these giant whirlpools, or vortices, of subtle matter.
And his laws of motion, they weren't derived from experiments, were they? They came from his idea of God.
Absolutely. The immutable constancy of God guarantees, for Descartes, that the total quantity of motion in the universe remains constant. It's a precursor to our conservation laws.
But he got the details wrong.
He did. He defined this quantity of motion as a body's size multiplied by its speed. He kind of mixed up what we would now call mass, impulse, and kinetic energy. It shows the limits of pure deduction without careful measurement.
But he also articulated the principle of inertia, the Trägheitsprinzip.
A brilliant deduction. He argued that a body will always tend to continue its motion in a straight line unless something acts on it. Again, this comes from God's constant action. Motion must be linear unless it's diverted.
Which explains centrifugal force. Things moving in a circle are always trying to fly off in a straight line.
That's his explanation. But this brings us to his famous collision laws, the Stoßgesetzes, and this is where his purely rational method really hits a major snag.
What happened?
He detailed 7 complex cases of how bodies collide, and he was confident they were true because he deduced them rationally from his first principles, God's constancy, the definition of matter. But most of them were just wrong.
How so?
For example, he described outcomes for collisions that would only be true for perfectly inelastic collisions, not elastic ones. He neglected the vectorial nature of impulse. He just failed to account for the real complexity of how energy is transferred in an impact.
So even the great champion of pure reason could get it wrong when faced with the messy reality of the physical world. And this failure really highlights that famous, almost shocking statement he makes about reason versus observation.
It absolutely does. He wrote that even if experience seemed to contradict his laws, we would still be compelled to trust our reason more than our senses.
That's the ultimate rationalist statement. If the logic is flawless and it comes from a certain foundation, then it must be our senses that are wrong.
It's pure rationalist dogma. The senses can deceive, but God-guaranteed reason cannot.
Okay, so moving from the cosmos down to the human body, he applies the exact same mechanical principles. He treats the body as a machine.
A very sophisticated one, a machine incomparably better arranged than any man-made clock because it was made by God. But a machine nonetheless. All of its non-thinking functions, digestion, movement, sensation, could be explained purely mechanically.
Like the heart's motion. He didn't think it was a muscle contracting.
No, he explained it based on heat and expansion. He thought the heat of the heart rarefied drops of blood as they entered the ventricles, causing them to rapidly expand and push open the valves, like a tiny steam engine almost.
And what about the circulation of the blood?
He gives credit where it's due. He acknowledges an English physician, he doesn't name William Harvey, but that's who he means, for having broken the ice on this topic and teaching the perpetual circulation of blood.
And he confirmed it with a practical example.
Yes, the example of surgeons applying ligatures to an arm. You can see how the blood flows from arteries to veins, proving the circulation is continuous.
And all of this mechanical action, from sensation to muscle movement, was powered by what he called animal spirits.
The animal spirits. He described them as a very subtle wind, or rather a very pure and vivid flame. This flame ascended from the heated blood in the heart to the brain.
And from the brain, it traveled through the nerves.
Which he imagined as tiny hollow tubes. The spirits would flow through these tubes to the muscles, providing the mechanical force for movement. It's all governed by fluid mechanics.
So this incredibly detailed mechanical physiology leads to the final critical question. If the human body is just a complex machine, how do we distinguish a real human from a perfectly constructed automaton or robot?
This is a huge question for him, and he provides 2 most certain tests to make this distinction absolute. These tests separate humans not just from machines, but also from animals, which he believed were also just automata.
Brutes, as he called them. So what was the first test?
Speech. Specifically, communicative speech. He says a machine could be made to emit a sound in response to a stimulus, but it could never arrange them variously so as appositely to reply to what is said.
So it could mimic speech, but it couldn't have a real conversation.
Exactly. Even the lowest intellect human can do that. True speech requires organizing thoughts to convey an idea, not just a reflexive response.
Okay, and the second test was universal reason.
Right. Machines and animals rely on specific organ arrangements for specific, limited actions. A clock is much better at keeping time than we are, but it can't do anything else.
It's a one-trick pony.
Precisely. Humans, on the other hand, use universal reason, a single faculty of knowledge that is available for every occasion. This capacity for general problem solving is impossible to replicate mechanically. Since animals might be good at one thing but show no industry in others, that proves they don't have this universal reason.
And therefore, the rational soul cannot be a product of matter.
It cannot. It must be expressly created by God and joined closely to the body. And not just loosely, he says, like a pilot in a ship.
What does he mean by that?
He means the union is so intimate that it forms a real man, one capable of having feelings, sensations, and appetites. It's this close union that establishes the soul's nature as completely independent of the body, which can decay. And that, for him, proves the soul is immortal.
So Descartes' project is just monumental. It spans the entire intellectual universe. He gives us the foundation of modern rationalism and, of course, analytical geometry. His influence is inescapable. But his conclusions immediately created huge controversies.
Absolutely. His legacy is often defined by the massive problem he created, Cartesian dualism. This radical distinction between two completely separate substances, mind, or res cogitans, and matter, or res extensa.
And this separation created the famous inflexus physicus problem.
The interaction problem. If mind and matter are fundamentally different, how on earth do they interact? How does my non-extended thought cause my extended arm to move?
And his followers really struggled to solve this, didn't they?
They struggled mightily. It led to these very complex philosophical doctrines like occasionalism.
What's that?
Occasionalism is the idea that God personally mediates every single interaction between mind and body. The mind doesn't cause the arm to move. God sees the mind's intention, and on that occasion, he causes the arm to move.
So God is working overtime just to keep our basic motor functions running. It feels like his critics immediately jumped on this functional need for God in his system.
They certainly did. Blaise Pascal, his contemporary, had a very famous and deeply theological critique. Pascal argued that Descartes had reduced God to a mere Lückenbüßer, a stopgap, a functional placeholder.
Someone needed just to connect the two substances and get the machine of the universe running.
Exactly. Pascal's profound statement was that the God of Abraham is not the God of the philosophers. A functional God is not the God of faith.
If we jump forward a century, how did Immanuel Kant view the certainty of the cogito? Did he buy it as a rock-solid foundation?
Kant fundamentally questioned it. He argued that the certainty of I think actually presupposes internal experience, the experience of time passing. But, he argued, our ability to understand ourselves in time requires an external reference point. It requires external experience in space, with objects.
So, if Kant is right, the foundation of modern philosophy might be circular.
In a way, yes. It means the certainty of the cogito can't be seen as more certain than the existence of the external world. It undermines Descartes' whole project of proving the self first, then God, then the world. For Kant, they are all codependent.
And then in the 20th century, we get critiques from people like Martin Heidegger, who saw the whole Cartesian method as the starting point for a dangerous new worldview.
Heidegger saw Descartes' obsession with quantification-defining matter only as res extensa, pure measurable extension, as the birth of our modern technological mindset.
By throwing out all the qualitative richness of the world.
Yes. By making mathematical measurability the sole domain of scientific truth, Heidegger warned that this led to the unheilvollen technischen Beherrschung der Welt, the fatal technical domination of the world, where everything is reduced to a resource to be managed and quantified.
And that machine metaphor, the body as a machine, that had huge sociological consequences as well.
Thinkers like Foucault pointed out the deep impact of this idea. It provided the philosophical and scientific justification for viewing human bodies as mere objects of political and economic management.
It paves the way for technocratic and disciplining processes in society.
Treating humanity as a collection of predictable, repairable, and replaceable parts. So yes, Descartes' revolutionary decision to doubt everything led to a search for certainty that was monumental, but it also laid the groundwork for some of the biggest philosophical and ethical challenges of our modern era.
He found a kind of certainty in the cogito, but the consequences of that certainty, that absolute split between mind and matter, are still challenging how we define reality, morality, and even consciousness itself.
So, to summarize the central, enduring statements of Descartes' Discourse on the method as a takeaway. First, the absolute prime requisite for any knowledge is a rightly applied method, which has to be governed by those four strict rules of reason: evidence, analysis, construction, and enumeration.
Right. The method comes first.
Second, to get to absolute certainty, you have to systematically reject all opinions that can be doubted. That culminates in rejecting your own senses and the entire external world.
Then third, the unshakable foundation you're left with is that immediate realization. I think, therefore I am. The cogito ergo sum. This establishes the mind as a substance that's distinct from and more easily known than the body.
Fourth, the criterion for all truth becomes clear and distinct conception. And this criterion is only trustworthy because it's guaranteed by the existence of a perfect and non-deceiving God. Finally, the human being is a dualistic entity. The body is a machine, yes, but the rational soul is independent and immortal, and it's separated from the brutes, from animals, by the unique human faculty of universal reason and specialized communicative speech.
Let's circle back for a final thought to that central tension we saw in his physics. Descartes stated that even if experience seemed to contradict his mechanically derived collision laws, we would still be compelled to trust our reason more than our senses.
A truly radical statement of faith in reason.
But we know his rationally derived physics were in fact largely flawed when you actually measured them against reality. So, what does that imply for us today? For modern, highly complex scientific models, from quantum mechanics to climate simulations, that are derived almost entirely from mathematical and rational structures, they often run far ahead of our ability to gather comprehensive empirical data.
It's a great question.
If even a genius like Descartes, operating from what he believed were clear and distinct foundations, could have his entire rational framework contradicted by observation, is the quest for absolute certainty, even when it's grounded in pure mathematical reason, forever destined to clash with, or maybe just fail to capture, the full complexity of the world? Is that ultimate certainty always just beyond our reach? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the method that launched modern thought. We'll see you next time.